Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast and get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Sarah Samaan. She's a retired cardiologist and a master certified physician development coach. Today's Kevin MD article is titled Using the Language of Art to Create Work-Life Balance. Sarah, it's great seeing you again.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me back.
So to hear Sarah's story, she's been on multiple times. Go to kevinmd.com/podcast. Upper right-hand corner, there's a search icon. You can search for Sarah's name to hear her story. But today, let's jump right into your most recent article, Using the Language of Art to Create Work-Life Balance. How did this article come together?
Yes. So, as a physician coach, one of the most common reasons that people seek me out is to find work life balance. And so I started investigating that a little bit further because it's such a common question. And it turns out that in 2022, 85% of new physicians coming out of residency programs cite work life balance as their number one concern. And that's up from 63% in 2018. So it's an increasingly important factor in physicians determining what kind of job they want to take. And what's interesting is that, we might think that it's something that's more related to women and families. And so, as it turns out, amongst millennials, work-life balance is equally important for men and women.
So when people say work-life balance, that could mean a lot of different things to different people. So as a physician coach and people ask you about work-life balance, how do you define it for them? What does that mean to you?
Right. That's a really good question because work life balance can mean very different things to different people, and it can be different at different stages of our lives. So, work life balance is really a matter of finding personal harmony between your work life and your personal life. And the personal life is any way that you define that for yourself.
So you bring in the language of art theory as it relates to work-life balance. So as it relates to art, talk about that concept of balance.
Right. So I'll just give a little background. I retired from my job as a cardiologist. I practiced cardiology for nearly 30 years and retired in early 2022. And one of the reasons was that I wanted to pursue other life passions. And being in practice was just not going to allow me to pursue these passions at the same intensity that I really wanted to devote. So I'm right now in the process of obtaining a bachelor's in fine arts degree. And so I've been exposed to a lot of great information, great background on art theory. And one of the things I started to realize in my work as a physician coach and how that connected to the idea of art theory was that I could really apply what I was learning from art theory to my work as a coach. So when we think about balance in art, there's four different ways of looking at balance. There is the symmetric balance, which is what we traditionally think of as balance. So you can think of as a balancing scale or a perfectly balanced piece of art, such as architecture. The Taj Mahal is a great example of a symmetrically balanced ideal. But then there's also asymmetric balance, and that's often the more interesting kind of balance where the elements don't completely line up. There may be a larger element balanced by smaller elements, or it may be a matter of colors balancing out with a brighter color against darker, smaller elements. And then there's the radial balance where you have a central focal point with smaller radiating pieces. So you could think of the rays of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we have the crystallographic balance. And probably the most concrete way of thinking about that is an empty chessboard where every piece is equal.
All right. So we have these four types of balance in art theory. So how can you relate these concepts to balance in a physician's life?
Right. So when we think of the idea of symmetric balance, in terms of a physician's life, it's really not very practical. There may be some cases where work and life can balance out completely, but really that's not the way that balance usually works. And partly that's because when we think about work and life, we're not just thinking about two completely different things. We're thinking about work and we're thinking about our personal life, we're thinking about our health, we're thinking about hobbies we might have, interests that we have. So work and life are not necessarily equal things because life can be so complex. So when I think about developing balance as a physician, asymmetric balance feels like the most reasonable way and most creative way, really, to develop our own personal balance. So when we think about asymmetric balance, again, the perception of weight is balanced. So there's harmony there. And that's what we're searching for when we are trying to achieve a sense of work-life balance, but the pieces are not equal. So if we think about this, asymmetric balance actually falls apart when the pieces are too equal. Asymmetric balance is much more interesting and cohesive when the pieces are different. And so usually we've got a dominant element and other components play a supportive or balancing role. And often you'll have two or three supporting elements that balance out the larger element. And often, too, in asymmetric balance, ideally, there will be some type of tension to make it an interesting piece of work. And the image thereby feels complete.
Now, give us a case study story or an example of a physician's life, and it could be hypothetical, it could be an amalgamation from your coaching, where we can apply this concept of asymmetric balance to this physician's life. What would that look like?
Right. Well, I think that, first of all, just to step back a bit, balance can change over time. And there are different times in the life of a physician where balance is going to look different. So, for example, somebody who's in their residency program may be feeling overwhelmed with work, and yet that's a time of life where the balance clearly is asymmetric, and the larger aspect is going to most likely be that residency program, learning and growing and acquiring the skills that you're going to need to move forward. So at that point in life, sometimes you do have to accept that this balance, this tension might not be comfortable.
Hmm.
And but if you can look at it this way and kind of realize that we're dealing with movable elements, it can give you more of a sense of ease, knowing that, okay, this is the balance that I'm experiencing right now, and that this large piece of my medical practice, or for example, someone who's just starting out in practice may have the same sense of an overwhelmingly large piece, that this is not something that's always going to stay this way. And yet, on the other hand, to create balance, we do need to have those other pieces. So if you can think of it that way as well, having this large, busy, building, growing part of the practice, but still maintaining and nurturing the smaller elements, family, relationships, hobbies, then over the long term, that's going to give you more options for moving those elements around and changing the weight of the different elements. And I do want to say, just backing up again a little bit, that it is important that you maintain a balance in some way or another. And that's not only for your own personal benefit, but that we know that patient care can actually be enhanced when people have a greater work-life balance. There was a study out of Duke that found that patient care actually improved when physicians and other members of the healthcare team did have a greater sense of work-life balance.
Give us a sense of what kind of physicians come to you for coaching, and maybe give us a story of how I don't want to say typical physician, but give us some examples of how physicians today can have their life imbalance. What are some examples that you're hearing through your coaching experiences?
Yeah. So again, I find a lot of people come to me with concerns about work-life balance. And I think part of that has to do with the disconnect between the physician and the management of the practice. So in years past, when physicians owned their own practice, they were able to create that balance for themselves. And so at certain stages of life, the practice might have required or been more motivated by the development of a larger patient population, for example, or the growth of certain skills and the importance of the physician reaching out to grow their practice in a more rapid way. Now those decisions are not necessarily made by the physicians. So physicians are often feeling overwhelmed and feeling as if their lives are being dictated by external forces, and that's not always the case. And often, the people that come to me are the ones that are dealing with this sense of unease and imbalance, and perhaps the people that are in their own private practices or working within systems that allow more flexibility are not necessarily seeking out coaching. But often people are coming to a coach for help or direction, helping find their own direction and creating their own goals. And I think it's important to realize that when you are in a situation where your own personal growth and personal balance is not being honored, that there are other opportunities. And sometimes the right answer is getting out of the situation that you're in. But sometimes the right answer is also being empowered to negotiate and to learn what you can say no to, and perhaps even to experiment with what you can say no to. Where can you find more ease? Where can you find more balance? Sometimes that also means giving up your perfectionism. Sometimes it may mean that a physician, for example, who has taken on a lot of roles outside of patient care, needs to learn to say no. Some people are involved in a lot of committees, for example, and sometimes it's hard to say no. You may feel that you're needed. You may feel that your future might depend on saying yes to everything that you're offered. But sometimes when you take on those roles, you're saying no to something that might be even more important to you. So when you take on a new role or new project or new committee, it's important to realize that anything you say yes to, you're having to say no to something else. And so creating that awareness and being more intentional, being more mindful about the choices that we make in one sector of our life can impact all the other aspects of life as well. And again, create that balance that may feel harmonious or may not feel harmonious. And so getting that balance back to what's appropriate for you as an individual is something that may take some work and may take some contemplation, may take some time. But in order to have a practice that's resilient, that's able to sustain you, it's important that you develop and understand your own balance.
One thing that you said resonated with me is that sometimes physicians need to let go, for instance, of their perfectionism, or maybe their notes aren't as perfect or as comprehensive as they like. So that means in order to achieve that balance, physicians can't rely on the environment themselves to change, but they themselves sometimes have to change in order to achieve the balance that they want. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think it's really important to be realistic with yourself about what you can do and know that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And also know that when you say no to something, it doesn't mean never. So maybe there's something that you're really interested in, but right now you just can't take it on. You can say no now, but you still can leave the door open for future possibilities. I think it's also important that when physicians are feeling overwhelmed and feeling as if their lives are out of balance, that again, turning to the idea of giving up perfectionism, allow yourself to be a beginner in something else. Allow yourself to develop hobbies or interests that you don't have expertise in, and just give yourself 10 or 15 minutes every day. And you'll find that over time, if you find something that's important to you, that resonates with you, your ability to devote time to that may actually grow. Now, we haven't mentioned the issue of family life, and that's something that obviously you don't always have control over. And again, when we look at where balance lies, sometimes at certain times in your life, that family element is going to require more dedicated time and more dedicated energy. And so for each physician, it's going to be important to be able to step back and try to look at things objectively. Sometimes that can be helped by working with a coach. Sometimes just being able to sit down and give yourself time to mindfully work through where you are now, where you want to be, and what the steps are to get there may be all that it takes.
We're talking to Sarah Samaan. She's a retired cardiologist and a master certified physician development coach. We're talking about her Kevin MD article, Using the Language of Art to Create Work-Life Balance. Sarah, tell us some of your take-home messages that you would like to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Yes. So I think, first of all, thinking about balance as something that doesn't have to be perfect and that is something that will change over time is an important way to conceptualize your own personal balance, and understanding that your balance and what's right for you may not be the same as somebody else. Define where you are in your practice trajectory and know that things are not always going to stay the same way. So if you're not satisfied or comfortable with your balance, that doesn't mean that it's wrong, but think about how you're spending your time and learn to say no when you need to, and understand that saying no is something that can elevate your life and can give you more joy and allow more space for the other elements of your life to move in. Thinking about delegation can help a lot when you're thinking about saying no. And giving up your perfectionism and being realistic about what you can do. Asking for help when you need it, and whether that might be somebody to help at home, a scribe at work, a coach to help you work through the questions that you have about how your life is going and what trajectory you want to pursue. And then just think about how you're using your time in other ways. Are there places where you can take that time that might be not suiting your values and not resonating with you, and use that time in a way that might be more harmonious and more joy fulfilling?
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed meeting with you again.